Thank you, Martin. So, good morning, good afternoon and good evening, according to where you're watching from. The purpose of the first part of this presentation is to help you to prepare abstracts that can be accepted by an ISBT Congress. Though anything I tell you will also be appropriate for any other Congress. And then in the second part, I'm going to say something about what happens after your abstract has been accepted, because then you will need to prepare a poster or possibly an oral presentation. And once again, this should be appropriate for an ISBT conference, but any other conference, and possibly even for small local meetings. Now, I should say that I'm not an expert in this field. I have no qualifications in this field. I'm just a scientist, but I have written many successful abstracts. I've prepared many posters and given numerous talks. I've been a reviewer of abstracts for the ISBT, for the British Blood Transfusion Society and for the AABB, and I've been an abstract coordinator for the British Society and on the Abstract Review Committee for the AABB. Now, you may not agree with everything I say, and you may be correct, but I think just by making you think about these things, it may increase your skills. So we'll start with the question, why do you want to submit an abstract? Now, the answer might be because I have some interesting and original data that I think is worth sharing with others at an international congress. That's great. Perfect. Or it might be because my manager says I can only attend the congress if I present an abstract. Well, of course, if you've still got good material, that's fine. But if you haven't got any good material, then your abstract is unlikely to be accepted. So if you haven't anything worth presenting, it doesn't matter how well you write the abstract, it is unlikely to be accepted. So what do you need to do to get your abstract accepted? Does it have to be rocket science? Well, of course not. So what does it have to be? Well, firstly, it has to be original. Now, when I say original, I don't mean it has to be groundbreaking science. It just has to be work that hasn't been published, hasn't been presented at another international meeting. But if you've presented it at a local meeting, that'll be fine because most people attending the ISBT Congress won't have seen it. It has to be relevant. It must be about blood transfusion or a related topic such as cellular therapy or transplantation. If you submit an abstract about something that's nothing to do with these topics, then it won't be accepted. It has to be interesting. It doesn't have to be interesting to all delegates attending the Congress. Just a proportion of the delegates need to have some interest. And it needs to be based on sound science. Now, when I say that, that only applies if it's a scientific abstract. And as you'll see in a minute, not all abstracts are scientific. But if it's a scientific abstract, it must be based on sound science. And if you use statistics, levels of significance must be provided. And it mustn't be too commercial. It mustn't read like an advert for your company. So what topics can you submit an abstract on? Well, this is the list of topics that were used for this conference. Management and organisation. This emphasises the point that an abstract doesn't necessarily need to be scientific. These are the subdivisions of the topic for management and organisation. Blood donation with these subdivisions. Then the more scientific topics, blood products, transfusion-transmitted infections, and immunohematology, which will also include platelets, red cells, neutrophils. On the more medical side, clinical transfusion, and then there's cellular therapies, clinical immunogenetics, which will also include HLA and histocompatibility, and novel developments. Now, after you've submitted your abstract, it will then go through a reviewing or refereeing process. And the ISBT has a panel of numerous expert reviewers for all the topics. Each abstract scored from 1 to 5 by several reviewers. And this is the scoring scheme that they use. A score of 1 is unacceptable, and those abstracts will normally be rejected. A score of 2 may be accepted as a poster or may be rejected. That will come down to an editorial decision. And these low scores, if reviewers give these low scores, they do have to justify the low scores. A score of 3 means it's suitable for a poster presentation. 4 is very good and can be a poster or an oral presentation according to the slots available. And then 5 would be excellent and would be a first choice for an oral presentation. And the ISBT does reject a proportion of its abstracts. At this Congress, 352 abstracts were submitted, 35, about 10%, were rejected. Now, of the 317 that were accepted, 17% were accepted for oral presentation and 83% for poster presentation. So assuming that you have material worth presenting, how do you now ensure that your abstract gets accepted? Because good material in a poorly written abstract may be rejected. So a well-written abstract is much more likely to be accepted. It may even be accepted as an oral presentation, and a well-written abstract will enhance your reputation and also the reputation of the organisation you work for. Firstly, ensure that you check the submission deadline. If you miss the submission deadline, you won't get your abstract accepted. So start writing much earlier than the submission deadline to give you chance for your co-authors to look at it and study it thoroughly. If you're not a native English speaker, get the English checked. Preferably get it reviewed by a native English speaker if that's possible. And don't leave the submission to the last minute. If you do, then any email, any electronic glitch or any other problem will mean you'll miss the deadline. And very importantly, follow the rules. The rules for the format for the title and authors, the maximum length of the abstract, and the format of the abstract into subheadings. And remember, the rules very often change between conferences, even between conferences within the same organisation. So make sure you always check out the rules. So when it comes to writing the abstract, you will normally need to include why you did the project, how you did it, what the results showed, and an analysis of what they demonstrate. So these are the subheadings that are very often required for an abstract submission. Sometimes they're mandatory, sometimes they're not. But before you think about that, you have to come up with a title. The title must be concise, but must be informative. And if possible, you should try to attract the reader's attention. And the title may be published only in uppercase letters, so beware of that. For the background should be a brief introduction to the topic, stating why the topic is important and why you carried out the project. For the methods, well, obviously in an abstract, you're not going to be able to provide methods so that people can repeat your own experiments. All you need to do is say how you designed the experiment and provide enough information so that people know basically what you did and the techniques you employed. Results. You must include real data. You must include real results or the abstract will be rejected. It is not enough to say that results will be provided on the poster or in the presentation. They must be in the abstract. If appropriate, you can use tables and figures such as bar charts and pie charts. But if you do that, you have to be sure to follow the submission instructions carefully. And if you use statistics, ensure that they are presented correctly. The conclusion will provide information on the significance and the importance of your results. And try to provide a brief take-home message. Some readers who are looking through all those abstracts, many of them will only look at the conclusion, so it's a very important part of the abstract. Try always to be clear. Define abbreviations the first time you use them. Now, there are exceptions to this. Abbreviations which you can be sure that anyone reading your abstract is going to know what they are, such as DNA or AIDS, don't need to be defined. But otherwise, define abbreviations. Avoid jargon. And always get someone else to read your abstract. Use the spell checker and grammar checker on your word processing package. You may be very good at spelling, but it's very easy for a typo to get through. So now you have to submit your abstract. So you go into the website, you have to choose a password and a login, then make sure that you read all the instructions carefully, and then it's time to paste in your title and the text of the abstract. You can include underlining, italics, superscripts or subscripts, answer some questions about your presentation preference. Finally, when it's all done, make sure you click on this submit button. If you don't, it won't be submitted, and that will generate an email that will be sent back to you. So, if you've got reasonably good information to present and you follow what I've just told you, then your abstract will almost certainly be accepted for presentation. And in most cases, it will be accepted as a poster presentation. So now you've got to prepare your poster. How do you do that? Number one, once again, read the instructions carefully. Be careful of the size dimensions. It must be the right size, and it must be in the correct dimension, portrait or landscape. They're usually portrait, but there are exceptions. And if you get it wrong, this is what tends to happen. When you're preparing your poster, present your data and information clearly and concisely. And the key word here is concisely. A poster should not be a scientific paper transferred to a poster. Try not to use too many words. Some people at the meeting will be very interested in your poster and they will want to read all of it. They should be able to do that in a few minutes. Other people, well, there are going to be several hundred posters at some conferences. Other people will just be browsing. And many delegates will just have a quick look, see if you can attract them to look at the poster and get the take-home message from a few lines of text. So the conclusion to the poster is very important. Make sure you focus on the main message. Again, I repeat, not too many words. And use bullet points when possible. Avoid long sentences. And use the large font size. If there's a crowd of people around your poster, some people may have to read it from a bit of a distance. Use tables and figures to present your data as much as possible, and keep the reading sequence well ordered and obvious. And then, if possible, make the poster colourful and visually attractive. And one other point, there's no need to print out the whole abstract on the poster. It takes up a lot of space and it's available elsewhere. So now, how do you go about making the poster? Well, in my opinion, the easiest way is to prepare it in PowerPoint and then sending it to a photographic department or commercial photographic organisation who will then print it onto card or some other medium. And this is all done by preparing it in one page of PowerPoint. Make sure you leave enough time to get it printed. It can then be rolled up and put into a large document carrier for safe transport to the conference. Now, if you're flying to the conference, this may be the only article of hand luggage you'll be allowed to take on the plane. If you put it in the hold, it might get lost. An alternative is you might be able to get it printed on cloth, and then that can be folded and put in your briefcase or your suitcase, but that will be more expensive. So here's an example of a poster that was done on one page of PowerPoint. Notice lots of diagrams and figures, not too many words, and very clear conclusions. Some people print off multiple copies of A4 handouts and provide them for delegates to take home with them. Now, this is helpful, but by no means essential. Now, if your budget doesn't run to using photographic organisations, there are cheaper ways of making posters. And one of the easier, cheaper ways of making a poster is just to make your poster in PowerPoint and print onto a number of A4 cards and attach to the poster board separately. Now, this has the advantage that, again, it will go into a briefcase or a suitcase, but it's a bit fiddly to put up. You may be required to attend a poster presentation session. Now, the ISBT currently favours just having a time slot where authors are requested to stand by their poster and answer questions and engage in discussion. But some conferences have poster walks, and the ISBT used to do that, in which a easily recognisable moderator leads the authors round the posters, inviting them to give a brief presentation and answer questions. And this is an example of an easily recognisable moderator. And some conferences will even give prizes for the best posters. Now, if the referees really like your abstract, they may invite you to present it as an oral presentation. This means you don't have to make a poster, but it does mean you've got to get up in front of an audience and talk to them. And this can be a bit daunting if you've never done it before, or if English isn't your first language. You don't have to do it. You can select not to give an oral presentation. But I think that if you get the chance to give an oral presentation, it is more satisfying and is more prestigious. Now, I'm not going to say very much about public speaking, just give a few hints. Firstly, if you're giving a presentation, you will need to start by making a PowerPoint presentation. Most speakers at conferences use this way of speaking, so that's something that needs to be done. A few hints: don't put too much on each slide, use bullet points, but just a few per slide, use pictures and diagrams wherever appropriate, and you can use the animation in PowerPoint to make the presentation flow well, but not too much, not so much that it's distracting from your main point. You have to remember you are up there to impress the audience with your work and not with your skill with PowerPoint. So having prepared your PowerPoint, or as you prepare your PowerPoint presentation, you also have to prepare your talk. Now, if you're not a very experienced speaker, I would suggest that you write out your talk in full, or if not in full, at least in bullet points, and practice your talk well. And I'll repeat that, practice your talk well. That's important because that will give you the confidence that you will be able to go up and give a good talk. You may be nervous. Most speakers are nervous. Don't worry about it. Once you get started, it doesn't really show. Make sure you take your presentation to the speaker ready room in plenty of time, certainly within the time requested by the conference organisers. And then, before you give your talk, make sure you get to the session early enough to meet the moderators and then to get up on the lectern, find out how the microphone works, how to change your slides, how well you can see your slides. There's usually a screen in front of you or down there somewhere else, and how the pointer works. And don't go over your time limit. Should you work from notes? Should you take notes up to the lectern? Well, it's a little bit unfashionable to take notes up to the lectern, but I would say that if by taking notes up with you will make you feel more comfortable and more confident, then do it. Many speakers use their PowerPoint slides as notes, but be careful with that. You don't want to stand here with your back to the audience while you read your notes and then point to every word as you do it. Try to avoid that. So then, should you use a pointer at all? Well, you don't have to use a pointer. There's plenty of facilities within the animation of PowerPoint to highlight items without using a pointer. But if you do use a pointer, use it sparingly. Just point to what you want to point at. Don't scribble round. And don't do that either. So these pointers can be quite difficult to use sometimes. And where possible, try to maintain eye contact with your audience. Finally, when you get to the end of your talk, try to bring it to a real conclusion. End with a concluding sentence, possibly a reference to the future. You may want to thank your co-workers, but that's not always necessary if they're all co-authors on the abstract. And be sure that the audience knows when you have finished. Well, it's a bit embarrassing when somebody just stops and everyone thinks, have they finished? Should we start clapping? So just the easiest way is just to thank the audience for their attention, and then they'll know it's time to applaud. And then you may have to face maybe 5 minutes of questions. Remember, it's your work you've been talking about, so you will usually know the answer. If you don't know the answer, just say you don't. Don't waffle too much. And finally, remember that the audience is on your side. They want you to give a good talk, so just get up there and enjoy it. Thank you for your attention.